This project is funded through HRSA, and it's called the Health Occupations Providing Excellence in Workforce Wellness and Resiliency Grant. And this is the third year of our project, so this grant will end at the end of the year in December. So today, we're super excited to talk about self-care and hope to cover these 4 objectives. So the importance of self-care, different techniques related to self-care, developing some of those techniques. That's where Scott's going to talk to us. And we're going to also kind of apply those concepts to ourselves. So those things will be talked about kind of in tandem. But that's our goal for our time together. I'd love to just start us off by kind of thinking together about what does self-care actually mean. And I know it's hard, but the idea is to be brief. So if you don't mind unmuting or either putting in the chat, like what does self-care mean to you? What does that concept mean? Peace. Oh, I love that one. Being calm, self-priority, health. Yes, doing things for you that make you happy. Taking time for yourself, rejuvenation. I love these words. Recharging, being proactive, balance. Wow, you all are doing a great job. When I read this slide right before we hopped on, I thought, I don't even know if I could say this in one word, but you all are doing a great job of coming up with kind of adjectives to describe kind of what self-care means. Time for yourself, care for yourself, being intentional about it, right? Happiness. Okay, great. So as you can see, just from kind of the simple question and everybody's response, there's themes coming out, right? And the definitions you all are sharing about taking care of yourself, being intentional about it. And so, there's a lot of different definitions of self-care. And I don't know, that's either Scott or I are so focused on one definition at the exclusion of others. It's really about what it means to us. But it is really about a practice, right? An ongoing practice of taking kind of an active role in caring for your well-being, health, and happiness, right? Particularly in times of stress or challenge, which oftentimes that's the hardest part, right? So, but thinking about self-care as a practice, an ongoing practice, something that we're constantly striving for, working towards, behaviors we're engaging in on that road to really trying to care for ourselves, and meaning that in a very broad sense. So we thought, Scott and I talked when we put together this presentation, kind of, why is it even important to engage in self-care? Probably for this audience, you all know, right? You're very busy people, often practitioners working with lots of clients, managing multiple tasks, having responsibilities inside and outside of the workplace setting. And as we know, all of those things can really be stressful, right? They can be challenging. All of these things collectively take up time, and self-care is important because it really allows us the opportunity to kind of recharge, reset, and really enhance our health, both in the short term, right, but also in the long term. We know, those of you that joined us for previous trainings, right, chronic stress leading to inflammation in the body can lead to other health-related kind of consequences. So the more we can do to kind of better manage our stress and the challenges that we are definitely going to face, right, in our lives, hopefully we'll have more improved kind of health outcomes. That's really the obvious one, I think, when we think about self-care. The other pieces of it, though, and I guess other justifications, if you all are already on board about why self-care is important to think about, right, is that it also helps us in honoring commitments we made to others, both in our personal life and in our professional life. If we're caring for ourselves and we're engaging in practices that help our overall health and well-being, it helps us be more effective, right? When we're often more at our best self when we're engaging with others, both personally and professionally. Of course, it helps us to kind of identify and manage challenges. It also, when we engage in self-care practices, it can help us kind of raise our level of awareness about our own personal vulnerabilities, what things kind of raise our stress levels, right? What are, the common word triggers? What are things that we really need to be mindful of in ourselves, situations we find ourselves in, and how can we kind of better manage those things? Self-care allows us the time and space to kind of think about that. And of course, it helps us to achieve more balance in our life. So that idea of work-life balance, other folks have kind of coined the terminology work-life integration, just this idea of having a balance, right, between what happens at work and home, and how we try to integrate those things or not, depending on the boundaries, right, that we're trying to set for ourselves. So let's move on then. So some of you were with us the last time, and we presented kind of an overall model of wellness. And so it's no surprise that when we think about types of self-care, that we really want to be thinking about it in a variety of domains. And I think sometimes we have tendencies to think about one type of self-care over another. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about the 6 different types of self-care that are here on this slide. Some of these you're maybe super familiar with. You engage in practices in those areas in, yourself, and others might be something new to think about. And so we're going to kind of talk about all those, and then we're going to engage in an activity that asks us to think about that a little bit more deeply in relationship to ourselves. Can anybody share what they think, either in the chat or unmute quickly? What would spiritual self-care look like? What is spiritual self-care?
I view it as connection, whether it is to yourself, your surroundings, your higher power.
Yes, that's exactly. I have a brief definition, and it contains all the words that you just said, right? So nurturing connections, right? Finding meaning in life, whether that's through meditation, prayer, spiritual events. And I see folks, talking about the different practices they engage in within that domain, right? Praying, meditation, making time to connect, right, with who inspires you. Some folks read inspirational literature, daily devotionals. Yes, all those types of practices, right, fit kind of in that spiritual domain. And all of us will define that differently, and the practices we engage in are going to be different, right? But it's important to think about when we think about our self-care and the types of self-care we engage in, do we engage in activities in relationship to things that help us find those connections and find meaning in life, whatever that looks like for us, right? Exercise in nature. Nature is a big one. Getting into nature. Great. Okay. So that one is the first one. And then we move into physical self-care. And so when we think about physical self-care, I think a lot of us, probably including myself, maybe think about kind of the exercise, right, component, the physical activity component of that. But I really want us to think a little bit more broadly in relationship to the physical domain of self-care, that it is actually more than just physical activity, right? What other things do you think would be included when we think about physical self-care? Nutrition, hydration. So what we're putting in our body, right? The amount of water, the types of food. Yes, going to the doctor, right? For checkups, preventative care, taking medicines, screenings, right? Engaging in those types of practices are definitely physical self-care. Exercise, sleep, yes. Nutritious food, meal planning, yes. Good rest. Wonderful. So yes, I think that's, so when we think about physical self-care, we tend to, think about the exercise part. And yes, that's definitely one component. But we also want to be thinking more broadly about what other things we're doing to take care of our physical body. And that does include all the things that you all mentioned in terms about what food we're choosing to put into our body, sleep, and also how we take care of our body in terms of going to the doctor, taking medicines as prescribed, etc. So this is the second kind of domain when we think about self-care. The emotional piece, right? The emotional aspect of self-care. This really includes kind of a wide variety of practices that are aimed towards coping with stress and helping us regulate our emotions. So this is where, a lot of us think about how do we kind of fill our toolbox in terms of coping skills and things that can help us kind of during these times of stress. Those of you that have joined us before, we've talked about some of them, and Scott will talk about others today as well. But really this idea of how do we take care of ourselves kind of emotionally, and what's important to us. And they can include things like journaling and gratitude um, and all of those things that help us kind of process emotions that we might be experiencing. Then we move into kind of the social aspect, right? This one I think is very intuitive, one of the most intuitive, right? We're social beings. That's part of the reason COVID was very difficult for so many of us, besides a lot of other reasons, right? Is that we were isolated at a time we were experiencing high levels of stress. So we're not really meant to live in isolation. We're meant to connect with others. And when we are busy, it's oftentimes very hard, right, to build this into our daily lives. So when we think about self-care and the types of practices that we engage in within the social dimension, how are we kind of connecting ourselves to others? And that's going to look different, whether it's family, friends, significant others, but who are we sort of surrounding ourselves with, engaging with, that brings us joy, right? That uplifts us, encourages us, supports us. Who are those people? And then thinking, are you spending time with them? And how are you spending time with them? And how do you make time for them? Which I can attest in my own personal life, it's very hard to do, right? When you're working and you're, trying to balance your own self-care and then trying to connect with others as part of that self-care. It's not always as easy as it sounds, but definitely something that we should all be thinking about as we think about improving our practice of self-care. Mental self-care. So here's an interesting fact for you all. Maybe some of you have heard this fact before, but there was a study that came out in 2020 and said that an average person, how many thoughts do you think an average person has in a day? I'm with you, like 10 million. That's what it feels like in my brain. No telling, too many. Exactly, too many, right? It would scare me to know. Yes, I agree. That's funny. So about 6,200 thoughts, right, that we have in a day. And the wild part to me, reading the statistic, was that about 80% of those things are not positive. So when we think about all the things that we think about, right, and then that's not a lot of positive things, right? Only 20% of those things we're thinking about are actually positive. And a lot of the thoughts we have are not one-time thoughts. I mean, how many of you kind of have these repetitive thought patterns, right? We think about it and then it comes back up again. And my husband's famous last words to me are, "Let it go, Aiden. You need to let it go." I'm like, right, I need to let it go. But so all that to say, a lot of our thoughts are negative, and they're not just one-time thoughts, they're repetitive in our mind. And so that's really, where mental self-care comes into play, is that we've got to help introduce more positive thoughts, right, into our thought patterns during the day, and sort of thinking about how do we do that, right? Like, how do we introduce new thought patterns, positive thought patterns, things that stimulate our brain, right, to think more positively. And so it's just something to think about. It's going to be different for each of us what we might choose to do, but being attentive to not only our emotions, not only the social domain, but our cognitive kind of thought patterns is a critical part about, when we think about self-care. And then the last one is professional self-care. And this is really, how do we take care of ourselves kind of within our job and within our workspace? And some examples of this, I actually was reminded of one yesterday. I was walking across campus and I was coming back to my office from a meeting on the other side of campus, and I ran across a couple colleagues who were on a walking break. Like, a couple of my colleagues from the college walking around, just doing a loop outside real quick. And that's not a one-time thing. They do it quite often. And so how do you take breaks, when you're at your job? How do you set boundaries? When do you leave the door open because you want some social interaction, but when do you need to close the door because you need to accomplish some things you need to get done at work? How do you set up your workspace, right, so that it's comfortable and you know, I don't know, like for me, if this desk is filled with lots of things, I can't be as productive. So my first step is always cleaning up the space before I start to work. So for all of us, it'll be different, but it's really about, we have all these self-care practices. We think a lot of them in relation to our personal lives, but also how do we think about them in relation to our professional lives and also what we do within our workspaces. So I am going to transition to Scott to take it away from here.
As I was preparing for this, I think, and this has actually been a discussion within the college, I think we are all bombarded in this profession, in these professions, with this concept of self-care. And I love to see that people are being so interactive because I'm hoping we can keep that up. And when I think about this, I think about like this idea of self-care as an intervention, but also like ways that sometimes we get thrown off. Like we all know we're supposed to do this. We all know we have the general understanding of the importance of it. But I think I think you were talking about working lunches, that came up multiple times. And it's like we all kind of generally know we want to avoid that, but we get pulled in so easily. And so I'm hoping that as we discuss this next couple parts that people can talk a little bit about that. So thank you, Aiden. So as we think about this, like from an intervention standpoint, right? I think especially the idea of a self-inventory and my idea of mindfulness, and we're not going to talk a ton about mindfulness today, most likely, just because I think that's our next presentation, and so we'll talk significantly more about that then. But having the ability to be mindful of yourself is really important in the self-inventory phase. When I think of this concept of mindfulness, and we'll hit a slide in a little bit, I'm thinking about this ability to be present with oneself, your thinking, your emotions, your physical state, your spiritual state. You use that self-inventory that was presented from the University of Buffalo. In a minute, we're going to throw up another type of a self-inventory that's been around since the 60s that was created to really look at life stress and the possible for exacerbation of medical illness. So this concept of being aware of yourself is really important. Um, and we all know the importance of relationships in managing stress and managing our lives. We are social beings. We don't do well when we don't have healthy relationships in our lives. Aiden was talking about setting boundaries. We're going to talk a little bit more about like our workplace and a little bit more about our environment, what we can control and how to maybe manage that. And kind of our basic needs. And again, that starts at the beginning. I should have probably flipped that slide, but having our basic needs met before we can even start to look at higher level stuff is an incredibly important. Looking at life events. So we talked about the self inventory, looking inward, looking at our own lives, looking at where our own discomfort is, looking at where we're not feeling comfortable in our own lives, looking at our self care. How frequently are we doing it? Do we need to up it? One of the things I talk a lot about, or I was a clinician. I worked a lot in a private practice, and one of the things I worked with a lot of clients on was kind of looking at our own physical needs and what happens when stress goes up. And frequently, as stress goes up, our ability to take care of ourselves starts to drop. All those wonderful coping skills that we're using when times are kind of low and we get under a lot of stress, and we have this kind of inverse relationship. So assessing your self-care, where you start to evaluate the types of self-care that are most prominent in your life, the areas you apply self-care the most frequently, and then in your own life, highlighting what area needs some attention, what area needs some level of attention in your life at this point, because you recognize like, hey, I'm not paying a lot of attention to this aspect or that aspect. So really looking in, and so you have that inventory, and then the next slide that Aiden has is another inventory. And so this is a life stress inventory that was really developed for medical physicians to be able to give to patients that were suffering from multiple physical ailments in the 60s, to be able to say, okay, well, what are you going through in your life in the last year? And and what are your risk scales for having disease in your life, in your body. And I found this really interesting. I filled this out as part of just kind of doing this. So I want you to take a moment. It won't take quite 5 minutes, but maybe 2, 3 minutes. You're going to want a calculator when you do this, and run through these and add up the score. And you may want to hold on to that score. Hopefully you're still not going, and you might be, I'm not quite sure. But what are your thoughts as you look at this and you think about our topic here of self-care? What are your thoughts as you look at this life stress inventory and some of the events and your score perhaps? And I'll tell you the score breakdown in a moment here. But just general thoughts about this as you look at this. Yeah, positive events. Surprising that those are stress producers, right?
I think that limiting it to 1 year misses a lot of stuff because some of these take way longer than a year for the stress of it to go away.
Most definitely, most definitely. And somebody mentioned on there are life stressors that are now generational, such as caring for an elderly parent and maybe a child at the same time, that wasn't really present when the authors created this. So there are going to be some things on here that aren't on here. I'm a big trauma. I have a big trauma background. I don't see anything about trauma on here, like specifically that might not be related to some of these things. So that was something that jumped out at me. Loans, financial issues. Yeah, that's one of the things I have written down in my categories to consider for, like, yeah, we've talked about physical and some of these other things, but financial is a huge one we have to consider these days. Yeah, that's what I was surprised. Life holidays, I looked at that and I thought, oh my gosh. I was like, oh my gosh. It's like just in our calendar year, we just in this culture probably have 5 major holidays, 6 major holidays. So yeah, so when I think about, we talked last week about, I think, burnout. We're last month about burnout. We're talking about mindfulness in a couple of weeks, talking about self-care now. I think a big chunk of what we're dealing with, we're in a helping profession, we're in a stressful profession, but we live in a world that's incredibly stressful. And so your work life can be completely imbalanced while you can have a whole lot of stuff going on outside of your work life. I know in our DBT team, we actually take a wellness weekly. We have a weekly team meeting, and we take a weekly kind of wellness check-in with every single member, and we ask people's wellness related to their professional life and their personal life, because you could have burnout, problems with stress going on in either case that could affect the other case, and can affect your then desire to do the treatment. So we actually check in on all three of those things because we're saying, where's your level of stress professionally, personally, and is this affecting your desire to do the treatment? Because I think these things are all absolutely connected. I don't think that we have the ability as humans to forget about this stuff. And I think this is the stuff that really creeps up, at least in my life, on me. I have a stressful job. I absolutely do. And this stuff is like out of my control many times, and it creates stress. And as many people said, you take a vacation and you're like, wow, that was on there, right? Like I think a vacation is taking reduced stress, or a holiday is reduced stress, and it's actually listed on there as a minor stressful event. So yeah, if you were surprised by your score or want to know scores, a score of over 300 or more indicates high stress and an increased risk of developing illness. A score between 150 and 299 indicates moderate stress and a 50% of experiencing stress-induced health problems within 2 years. And a score below 150 was a low amount of stress. There's a lot of stress in our outsourced life. So this concept of self-care is very important. We're going to employ coping skills to deal with stress in life. It's going to happen. And you can eliminate risky, you could say maladaptive, you could use problematic, it's up to you. But so we have substance misuse, overworking, isolation. These are kind of the obvious. Are there other coping mechanisms you might use in your life that you can identify that are problematic, that are ineffective at self-care? They might in the moment feel good / solve a problem, but extended, they might become problematic. Nobody wants to identify any of them. Don't go dig deep. Don't go digging deep into your skeleton. Shopping, there you go. There you go. Shopping could be problematic. Yes. We were talking about that financial overspending. There it is. I'm telling you, this Amazon thing, Jeff Bezos was a genius. Like, I mean, he really was. Like, it's like on whole nother levels now. Taking the girls to the park, yeah, maybe avoiding things in life. Maybe avoiding things by doing things, binging on TV that are more pleasurable, that are creating problems in the moment. They maybe don't even seem that bad. They might not be substance use, they might not be overeating, they might be avoidance behaviors. Doom scrolling, oh, I hear that all the time, right? You're just flooding, as Aiden was talking earlier, 62,000 thoughts. I wonder if doom scrolling cuts down or increases those thoughts. But 62,000 thoughts, and 80% of them are negative. And then you're doom scrolling, and it's like, there goes that 20%. It's shrinking more and more and more because you're just inundating yourself with that kind of stuff. Helpful coping skills. Yeah, we have the obvious: asking for help, setting boundaries or limits, planning time for yourself, recognizing your emotions. What are some others that are possible? What are some helpful coping skills you have found outside of these obvious ones, but anything that you have found that really works well for you, that doesn't create a problem later? Therapy, yeah, absolutely. Therapy is a great place. Sun, yeah. Sleeping, yes. Setting some limits and some boundaries, getting outside, exercise, wonderful. A walk in nature. Pet therapy, yeah. Reading. Sometimes taking an escape is helpful, absolutely. So as you think about this, what is the definition? We saw going to the park with my girls as a problem. I bet going to my park with my girls could also be helpful, right? How do you delineate the difference? How do you know when it becomes helpful, when it's problematic in your life, when you're using this? Balance, for sure. How it makes you feel short term, long term. What are we thinking here? I'm glad you bring that up. Yeah, in DBT, we talk a lot about our emotion mind, and our emotion mind is all about how we feel. And there's all kinds of things that are out there that feel great in the moment, and they're maybe not the greatest thing in the world for us. I think long term. I'm thinking long term, like in the moment. Is taking my girls to the park helpful to me? Is it helpful to them? Or am I avoiding the project I need to be working on to get ready for this lecture, right? Like, I have a toddler. I love to play at the park. I can't think of anything better to do in my entire life. If I've got papers to grade, if I've got people to see, if I've got a presentation to get ready for, that maybe isn't the best idea. Personal relationships, I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there that our relationships have a lot to do with our level of happiness. It has a lot to do with our level of support. There's some research out there that even just having a really good friend you can talk to is just as good as, if not better than, supportive therapy. I mean, so somebody said therapy, but having a good relationship, having people in your life, it's going to help you decrease your levels of stress, add meaning to your life. It encourages you to be a better person, right? I mean, how many people in their lives, right, like, woke up today or thinking in their moment, like, how am I a better person for my spouse, my partner, my son, my daughter, my mom, my dad, like my clients, my students, fill in the blank, right? Setting boundaries, I like to think of limits, right? So I like to think of limits. So as I was getting ready for this, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, well, how can I help people kind of understand this concept? So when I took this job at USC, I just recently started back in August of 23. I took a teaching job. That's all I took. I took a job that I was going to teach field, and that's seminar, and that's what I was going to do. Nobody mentioned these presentations or anything like that. Nobody talked about this kind of stuff, right? And unfortunately, a good friend of mine and a colleague, Melissa, passed, and Aiden approached me and she said, hey, a lot of this stuff is stuff you and Melissa had in common, and you know this stuff. Could you help out? And I thought, yeah, in this case, I'm going to extend my limit, right? I'm going to take on a little extra stress. I'm going to take on a little extra work. I'm willing to do it. It's for a short period of time. I can tolerate that, right? But if I'm going to do this long term, that's where we start to have problems, right? We start to have difficulties with our well-being, right? It causes problems with our stress levels. We're not able to focus on ourselves. We're not able to take care of ourselves. The getting ready for the presentation takes away from the other things I need to do. And if that's going to be a long-term problem, that's where we start talking about long-term buildup of stress, burnout, physiological problems, all kinds of issues. So learning where you can set your limits. We were talking about work, lunch breaks, office. You may not have a lot of say in your office location or in your place. What is within your limits? What is within your ability to create a space that you feel happy, where it's lower stress, where you feel, you get to walk away from the office for that 30 minutes at lunch. At least get out, get your 15-minute walk. It's funny, Aiden brings that up. I have one of these exercise watches. It tracks my steps. I've now been at the university. One of my biggest concerns going to the university was, I'm like, I bet I'm gonna be tied to my desk. Like, my step count's gonna drop. I go 2 or 3 times a day for these little 1 mile, 1.5 mile walks. I'm like, the funniest thing is, looking at 6 months worth of data, I'm like, I walk more on the days that I'm at the university than I do when I'm working it from home. I'm like, this is great. Like, it allows me, it's creating an environment that's good for my own health, which is great. So anyway, learning how to set some limits within your own work environment. Mindfulness. There is a lot of research out there, if you're a clinician, that shows that if you have your own mindfulness practice, your clients do better because you're more in tune. So mindfulness, my training in mindfulness comes from a DBT background. That's my background. I was a practitioner. Dialectical behavior therapy has a huge mindfulness component. A lot of this chunk of this stuff is drawn from that understanding. There's a lot of different mindfulness practices. So I'm not going to say this is the end all be all of mindfulness. This is my training, my background, my understanding. But the concept of mindfulness is learning to be present in the moment, to be aware of your experience, whether you're trying to be aware of your thoughts, or whether you're being aware of your emotions or your feelings. But it's about intentionally bringing your attention to something, to your awareness. How am I feeling? What are my thoughts? What am I feeling in my body in this moment? What is my connection to the universe in this moment? What's my connection to my spiritual being in this moment? My spiritual self, my greater power, whatever that is. And learning to sit in that space in the present without judging or comparing it to other aspects of your life or other times in your life, just allowing what is to be, because it is the moment, and that's what it is, and not criticizing yourself or other things. When you're able to do that, you're not living in the future. You're not living in the past. You're living in the present moment. You're staying in the present moment. You're being effective. You're doing your best in the present moment, as opposed to like kicking yourself. I wish I would. I should. I wish I. What if I? What if I? What if I? There's a lot of things that can increase the stress level. My spouse and I were having a conversation yesterday. She was a personal trainer at one point in her life, and she knows I was getting ready for this conversation, and she said, well, you will highlight, right? And I said, because you brought this up, I absolutely will. That physical exercise can actually have an inverse relationship, right? If you over exercise, you will release higher levels of cortisol, and it will actually be problematic. And so like, all forms of self-care don't always work, and you can overdo anything. This concept of mindfulness, you don't have to go anywhere for. It's the ability to be present in one's moment, prior to your session, during your lunch break. You can go on a vacation for 10 days, wherever you want, to find the most relaxing place on earth. But if all you do is spend the entire time you're there thinking about returning or what you should be doing or what else is going on or what else you could be doing in that moment, how else you might be maximizing your vacation, you're going to come back wiped out. You're not going to find that sort of connection that you were looking for. So I don't want to spend a lot of time there because, like I said, we were going to spend some time there next month. This is a visualization technique. So, mindfulness is about presence in the moment. Aiden spoke about the different types of different kind of categories of self-care, different areas that you might consider in your self-inventory. If you need to step away, you don't have the ability to walk away. You need a moment. There's a lot of different visualization techniques available. You can go to YouTube. There's apps and things. Aiden, I believe this one's on our website. Am I correct? Is this one of those things that's on our website? Yeah. So we wanted to make sure that we put this one on our put this one out there for the training. It's a visualization technique. It's sort of a self-soothing kind of escape, kind of get away from the moment technique that you can use. It's 3 minutes long, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes long. So we'll go ahead and we'll play this. You can feel free if you want to, mute your camera so you can participate, whatever it is you'd like to do. But go ahead and take a moment. Please feel free to participate in this.
Sit comfortably in your chair with your feet firmly on the floor. Relax your arms and hands. Take a deep breath in through your nose and allow your belly to expand. As you exhale through your mouth, let your belly fall. Continue your deep breathing. Now bring your safe place to mind. See it in front of you. Walk into the space. Feel the temperature of this place. Is it warm or cool? Can you reach out and touch anything? Look around and notice details. How bright is the space? Are you indoors or outdoors? If you're outdoors, what does the landscape look like? Do you see sunshine or clouds? If you're indoors, notice the details of the room. What color are the walls? What furniture do you see? Do you have favorite objects in this room? What do you smell? Fresh grass? Fresh baked goods? Imagine you can taste something, a soothing drink or a delicious treat. What do you hear? Focus on the soothing sounds. Ground yourself in this place with all of your senses. Feel how safe this space is for you. Look around and choose something that will help you summon this place when you need it. Take a final deep breath in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Prepare your mind to return, and when you are ready, open your eyes and refocus.
So again, wonderful moment to just kind of take a step back, take a break, kind of put yourself in a different kind of state of mind. Thank you, Aiden. If we want to move on to the next one. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm going to just touch on it. But, essentially Abraham Maslow came out with this hierarchy of needs years and years and years. I think this is back 60s or even further back than that. You've got to have your basic needs met: food, water, safety, financial. We've heard financial show up many times. Obviously, financial world has changed over time, but that is certainly a need. Having relationships, and you know, we get to peep our heads into the esteem and self-actualization worlds every now and again. So self-care is incredibly important. If you don't have those basic needs met, you're not going to be able to thrive. Essentially, that's all I want to say. Let's see. So moving on, we're going to talk about applying this. So again, I said earlier, we talk a lot about it, but the importance is the application of it. So let's get into kind of the application and the troubleshooting. So create a plan of action for yourself. Reflect back on some of the things we have. We've given you a couple of inventories. Create a list of the things you think that you're doing well. Create a list of the things you think that you might need to improve upon. Make a commitment internally. It could be written. We'll talk about that in a moment. Troubleshoot. That's a big chunk of DBT. So a big chunk of dialectical behavior therapy is the behavioral commitment component of it. So a big chunk of behavioral change is troubleshooting. It's figuring out what is going to get in the way of the plan I've created, and then figuring out a plan that for the most likely way that you're going to get around the most likely barrier or hurdle. Create a plan to maintain, and then have an emergency plan to catch yourself if you notice that you're slipping. So moving forward, in creating your list, your reflection, think about, what do you use? What are your go-tos? What are the ones that you use that are stronger? What are there categories that you're stronger in? Are there ones you tend to move to that can become problematic? Are there some that you tend to move to that tend to be more beneficial? Do you have favorites? You know, I'm getting older. I've always been an athlete, but as I start to push 50, running, I have a bad knee. It will start to catch up with me. I can't always do that. There are other types of things like mindfulness, working on diet, exercise, and other areas of my life that I can reduce stress. Changing work environments, some other things. Are there others that you may have heard out here? I'm hoping we can, you know, you've heard something here that you maybe hadn't thought about before. We heard of like line dancing and stuff like that. I thought that was fabulous, right? But I'm hoping you've heard something here in the chat, read something, Aiden brought something up that you're able to bring to your own life, that you're able to say, well, this is my takeaway here. Commit to yourself. So again, you've got to, you know, there's the saying, you want to put on your airplane mask before you put on anyone else's, right? You've got to take care of yourself. Take a moment to think about one thing. Don't try and change the world at once. Can you pick up one concrete, measurable behavior that you think is going to influence the category that you looked at in your inventory? That you think, yeah, this is a category I need to work on. This is a measurable behavior that I can implement that I think stands a chance at helping me improve my self-care. And go for something that's reasonable and doable. You set the bar too high, you're going to fall short, you're going to lose your motivation. If you set it too low, you're not going to feel like you accomplished a whole lot. So there's like this sweet spot that falls in there, right? And you want to commit to something that's measurable. Not a feeling that changes over time, like I feel like I'm making progress or not, but something you could measure. And you want to make sure you implement that on a regular. So you're going to try and commit to making an internal experience, but commit to being able to go through the process of the identification of the behavior, the implementation. And then last, but not least, one of the things that I really am a firm believer in is troubleshooting. What is the most likely thing that's going to get in the way of this plan? You're all predictors, right? You all work in human services. You all live in your lives. Is it my partner that's likely to get in the way? Is it the kids that's going to get in the way? Is it the work environment that's likely to get in the way? This is an area I see for need. What do I see getting in the way of that? What's the most likely thing? What are the things that have derailed my likelihood of being able to accomplish this in the past? And then you're all great problem solvers, you're helpers. So you're gonna figure out your way around the barrier. You're gonna go, okay, this is the barrier. Now what is gonna be my way around the barrier? Because I want to keep this plan intact. You're gonna implement your strategy, and a bullet point I really should have had on there is you're gonna evaluate it. I usually like to go through the evaluation component with a new behavior at like 30 days, at 2 weeks, at a couple of months, but at regular intervals to say, okay, well, am I measuring what I want? Am I doing what I want? Am I able to implement what I want? Do I need to make some changes with the things that have altered in my life? And then the last phase of this is going to be figuring out a maintenance plan. So how are you going to troubleshoot the mistakes, and then how are you going to keep the plan going? Has anyone ever noticed you lose motivation? You lose, like, you will lose the motivation. So what motivates us at first as we get a behavior going won't continue to motivate us long term. So you're going to need to troubleshoot what's going to get in the way, but then you're going to have to figure out a maintenance plan that's going to keep you motivated to keep it going. What got you going today isn't going to probably what keeps you going in 6 months. So identify what value you need, highlight the barriers, think about how to overcome those barriers. How are you going to have a reminder that goes off? Remember, this is a new behavior. When I troubleshoot behaviors with my clients, I say, what are you going to use? Are you going to use a sticky note? Are you going to use an alarm? Is there something you can use? Is there a cue you can put in your environment that's going to remind you of the new behavior so you can implement the new behavior when you know you're going to forget? Because you know you're going to forget. You know you're going to not have the motivation. New Year's, yeah, it's good about a month, right? Because you don't go through the troubleshooting, the maintenance. That. I agree wholeheartly. You have the initial motivation. The initial motivation is going to get you through that first 30 days. You know that if you know you're going to lose motivation at 30 days, then troubleshoot that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And then you got to go, well, what happens? Why don't those New Year's resolutions change? Do my goals change? If my goals change, and that's going to get into the maintenance end of it, and you're going to go, okay, well, now my goals are changing, so how am I going to maintain a focus on those new goals? Great. And then create an emergency plan. You will. It's a new behavior. You're gonna drop it. It's brand new. If we could, yes, celebrate progress, absolutely. Find ways to celebrate it. I love the behavioral measurements so that I get to go, woo, I did it. Like, I have the step goal on this, and I'm on day 5 now where I've hit my goal, and my long is like 7 days. So I'm like, I'm gonna get 8 days. I'm gonna do this. Like, I have a goal. I know I'm gonna shoot for it. It gives me the reinforcement right off the bat, right? So how are you gonna catch yourself when you slip? You know you're gonna slip. It's a brand new skill. It's a brand new behavior. What are you going to do? How are you going to help you relax? What are you going to do that's help implement the skill or the behavior? Who do you need for support? What are you going to say to yourself when times get difficult? What are the things you need to avoid? How are you going to keep the behaviors going?
So we're excited. I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but Scott and I wanted to build in just a minute because those of you that have joined us for any of these prior, even last year, we've been foreshadowing that we're going to have a website, and it's finally live, everybody. It's just so excited. This is our website, and if you click on the link and you go to the toolkit, there's an individual toolkit, and all the videos that we've been showing throughout all of our trainings are available on there. And you can sort them by the type of skill you're hoping to develop. There's some new ones on there that I don't think we've been even integrated. We have there's some new yoga videos that are on there, so a little bit longer, one's like 17 minutes. There's some breathing exercises. There's all kinds of stuff. We're excited about this because we've developed all this stuff throughout the years, but just haven't had a way to get it out to everybody. So please take advantage of it, but we're super excited to share this all with you. We really appreciate your time. I know the lunch hour is precious, and I hope you've been able to take away a few tips and skills and things to add to your toolbox as we all try to do our best, right, to manage stress in the workplace.